Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Soini Gray, and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Tell Us Your English. And we start this new edition right now. The Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, is expected to make a number of economic announcements at his first cabinet meeting of the new year. The government has already introduced an increase in the minimum wage and extra end-of-the-year bonuses. It is promising to defend living standards despite international financial sanctions and attacks on its plans to restructure its debt. Freddie Gillingham has more from Caracas.
Earlier this week, the New York-based credit rating agency Standard & Poor declared that Venezuela had missed a debt repayment of $35 million, paving the way for more condemnation against the Latin American nation in the international media. However, as part of the economic war against Venezuela, US-imposed sanctions are preventing the country from doing trading and investing with American banks. This opens up questions on what the agenda is for companies like Standard & Poor, and particularly how the media responds to their announcements. Placing Venezuela in the category of default can have major repercussions, as Carlos Lasso, a financial expert we spoke to, explains.
The rates of agencies like Standard & Poor and others towards Venezuela, like D of default, means that Venezuela comes into risk. A country that comes into risk means that they will not be able to pay the interests of any other debt restructuring in the future. The interest could be more than 18, 20, or even 25%, which are an exaggeration internationally. So Venezuela is then in a position where they will not be able to pay it because at the same time there's a reduction of oil prices. So this is a way to asphyxiate the Venezuelan economy.
The default announcement on Monday comes just after Venezuelan government officials met with bondholders in Caracas. However, progress like this has little weight if a media campaign declaring default only discourages private investors.
These measures discredited the state or the companies, making the bonds lose their value. In buying them for very low prices, they then wait until they can sell it at 100% of its value. This is what we saw in Argentina, and this is why we call it vulture capitals. This is what Standard & Poor's expects.
Despite the challenges, Venezuela is initiating new ways of dealing with this worsening economic war. A newly launched cryptocurrency backed by the country's vast mineral wealth is just one alternative that the government is having to come up with. Freddie Gillingham, Telesur, Caracas.
And this weekend, the Venezuelan government will begin a mass consultation to gather people's ideas for the new government plan for 2019 to 2025. Again, our correspondent Freddie Gillingham has more.
As part of President Nicolas Maduro's final televised announcement of 2017 that he made on Sunday, he declared that the plan of the Homeland Initiative will be elaborated on. He called for the nation to come together and he summoned the local social forces to meet this weekend to begin constructing a new plan for 2019 to 2025. Just to give you a bit of background information of what this plan is, it was set up in 2012 by the late President Hugo Chavez to serve as a kind of guide of governance on the various issues which affect the nation, most notably climate change, environmental protection, and the energy sectors. In that televised announcement made last Sunday, Maduro reiterated the importance for the people to come together to decide on these massive matters, and declared that it wasn't something that lawyers and consultants can create on their own. We will update you early next week on the findings of the weekend. That's all from me in Caracas. Back to you in the studio.
We thank Freddie for that report. 2 weeks after he was released from prison and pardoned on medical grounds, Peru's former leader, Alberto Fujimori, has been found well enough to go home. Fujimori waved to the crowds as he was wheeled to freedom from the hospital in Lima. There were cries of welcome and distress as Fujimori set off for the family home alongside his son Kenji. It has been alleged that Kenji helped to block an impeachment vote against the current president, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, in exchange for his father's pardon. And it's not just the pardon given to Alberto Fujimori that promises a turbulent new year in Peru. Environmental and social organizations have warned that 2018 could be a year filled with social unrest due to an increase in investments in mining projects.
The Chinese company Rio Blanco is saying that it will retake the Majaz project in the north of Peru with the hopes of extracting 50 million tons of copper a year, even though in 2007 there was a public consultation on the issue where 97% of the community said no to the mining project because it will affect natural resources.
What is this all leading to? It's an increase in social conflict. Confrontations are taking place again. Again, there are complaints against leaders that run the demonstrations in Uncabamba, for example.
According to Kuczynski's government, the recovery of the Peruvian economy for 2018 depends on the reactivation of stalled mining projects. However, for environmental organizations, the reactivation comes with a policy that will weaken environmental institutions.
A recent regulation has just exempted some mining projects with medium to large environmental impact. So this is really worrying because the environmental impact studies continue to be the only and minimum guarantee that citizens have that these projects will not affect us environmentally and socially.
Policies that, according to environmental NGOs, could motivate social unrest, especially in the southern Andean corridor, as one of the greatest concerns in this area are the dozens of projects where the government has declared a state of emergency, blocking the fundamental right of the community to protest.
It is pathetic that the government doesn't have any other tools to solve these conflicts. It's an authoritarian way, a way imposed by the armed forces of a supposed attempt for peace.
According to environmentalists, after 5 years of mining investments drop, the concessions for the extraction activity will account for 14% of the national environment. And many of these concessions are in vulnerable areas or where other renewable economic activities are carried out.
The Organization of American States has asked its 34 state members to approve the report from their election observers on the presidential election in Honduras. The OAS Secretary General, Luis Almagro, said that approval is urgent to clearly determine the irregularities in the process. Voters are still accusing the government of electoral fraud and have continued to protest against the re-election of Juan Orlando Hernandez. The Honduran government has rejected the OAS call to hold new presidential elections after the opposition alliance candidate Salvador Nasrallah denounced electoral fraud. For many, Juan Orlando Hernandez is starting his second consecutive term with low credibility and the opposition of the international community. Social movements in Honduras are denouncing what they call an alarming increase in suppression. Our correspondent in Tegucigalpa, Gilda Silvestrucci, reports.
Honduran military police were caught on camera in a neighborhood of Tegucigalpa searching for people who took part in recent protests.
The army showed up yesterday, very aggressively. They patted me down and threatened me by saying we would face the consequences if we had been involved in the protests.
Protesters say the military are harassing them and have the names and pictures of protesters who have regularly shown up to rallies.
We've been surprised to see they have a list with pictures of most of us. Of those of us who take part in peaceful rallies, it's hard to believe they're going door to door, showing our pictures and looking for us.
The army's presence increases at night, particularly in neighborhoods where there are regular protests. During the demonstrations that followed November's elections, it was commonplace to see the police and the military taking pictures and video protesters. This is something that alarms human rights organizations.
Another dangerous pattern we are seeing is the return of death squads. We are now dealing with death squads that are even more lethal and cruel than back in the 80s, because at least back then they would cover their faces.
Another worrying aspect is the widespread silence of the national media, who have yet not given any prominence to murders or human rights violations.
31 people have been killed, mostly young people from the lower class. This causes no commotion in this country, but if they had been journalists or someone from the upper class, things would have been very different. Sooner or later, Honduras will be condemned for these deaths.
Most of the deaths and human rights violations have happened in the northern region of the country, where the protests have been most intense.
Wrapping up a two-day visit to Cuba, the EU's top diplomat, Federica Mogherini, announced a series of agreements and said a delegation from the European Investment Bank would visit Cuba later this month. She announced a $60 million cooperation agreements in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, culture, and expertise, and repeatedly criticized the U.S. economic blockade of Cuba. Dominica is using its annual carnival to aid in its post-Maria recovery. At the launch of Carnival 2018, organizers spoke of the benefit the festival will bring to the island economically and psychologically. The CEO of Discover Dominica Authority, Colin Piper, says their focus is on promoting the island's nature, culture, and adventure.
These three events are in fact the cornerstone of our festival's tourism program. Like the nation on a whole and many other sectors, the tourism sector continues to build post-Hurricane Maria. I'm pleased that the cultural industries can play their part in both allowing us to honor and celebrate our tradition while stimulating the economy and allowing those who do earn a living in the entertainment and cultural spheres the opportunity to do so.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Ecuador's former president, Rafael Correa, arrived in the country on Thursday to lead the campaign against the referendum set to take place on February 4th. Correa said the referendum is unconstitutional and that it will only destroy the citizen revolution developed by his movement, País Alliance. Hundreds of supporters gathered at the airport in Guayaquil to greet the former president. And the official document containing the candidate names to replace Vice President Jorge Glass has been submitted to the Ecuadorian National Assembly. The move came 2 days after Glass's temporary work absence reached the 90-day limit. The president of the Assembly, Jose Serrano, announced that the plenary will meet on January 6th to elect the country's new vice president. And Ecuador's former foreign minister, Guillaume Long, has presented his resignation to the United Nations representation in Geneva. The reason for his resignation is the referendum proposed by President Lenin Moreno. The document criticized the process by which the referendum content was approved and referred to Moreno's supposed disloyalty to the political project of former President Rafael Correa. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos has met with the FARC in Cartagena to review the peace agreement advancements and challenges. Former Spanish Prime Minister Felipe González and former President of Uruguay, José Mujica, participated as international mediators. FARC members have accused the Colombian government of not completing its end of the peace accords since signing just over 1 year ago. The Colombian government ceasefire with the other guerrilla organization, the National Liberation Army, expires next Tuesday. Several civil society sectors have asked the ELN and the government to extend the ceasefire. More details in the next report.
University professor Victor de Curria Lugo is one of the hundreds of Colombians that signed a letter addressed to President Juan Manuel Santos and the ELN leader, Nicolás Rodríguez Bautista. The letter asked the leaders to maintain the ceasefire during the peace dialogue.
Negotiating in the middle of the war is dangerous, but it's even more dangerous to discard a ceasefire that required so much effort, which is the first in 26 years of talks between the government and the ELN, and it has shown real efficiency to the communities. Today, we are receiving messages from people of Arauca, Catatumbo, Cauca, campesinos, African American, and indigenous people who want an extension of the ceasefire.
During the bilateral ceasefire between the ELN and the Colombian state, there have been difficulties. However, the benefits of this are measured in the lives that have been saved. The peacemaker Carlos Belanda points out that in 3 months of ceasefire, 90 Colombian lives were saved, and 400 others were saved from being harmed. So that is why he also signed a letter from the civil society.
The death of a policeman, the death of a soldier, or the death of a guerrilla doesn't make too much of a difference in the balance of 53 years of war, but it does bring pain to the families and the communities of these people, so we should avoid unnecessary pain.
This request also comes from the regions. In the last hours, the Compass communities warned that 12 families were forcibly displaced from the Guijomando and Curvarado territories in Chocó due to combats between ELN and Gaitani's autodefense paramilitaries. People declare that it is urgent to extend the ceasefire and to dissemble paramilitarianism. Uncertainty still remains in the Colombian people. They expect that the ELN and the national government will be able to overcome the difficulties to maintain the peace.
People continue to protest in the Urabá region of Colombia against a road toll that controls transport between 2 municipalities. The demonstrators blocked some roads in the Carepa municipality while burning tires. Police forces tried to disperse the protesters. At least 1 person has been killed and many more injured since Wednesday. People in Chile are remembering Mateus Cartrillo, a young Mapuche killed 10 years ago during a peaceful demonstration. Our correspondent, Francisca Castillo, has more details.
Today we are expecting a new demonstration in the capital to honor and remember Matías Catrileo, a young Mapuche killed 10 years ago and who became a symbol of the fight for the indigenous communities. Let's remember that Matías Catrilero died while peacefully protesting to defend their land along with other members of the community. The Chilean police shot him 3 times. Today, several communities are remembering his fight around the country. In the region of Temuco, in the south of Chile, several events have been prepared, and today in the afternoon we are expecting a demonstration in Santiago. All of these are happening in the midst of a complicated process, since the Mapuche people are close to facing yet another trial at the end of February involving a murder of a couple, a high-profile case known as Luxinger Macay. The prosecution opened a new case after the 11 Mapuche that were accused of the crime were absolved. In February as well, Pope Francis will be visiting some Mapuche communities in the Araucanía region, and several demonstrations are expected then as well.
Panama has extradited back to Mexico a former state governor wanted for corruption. Roberto Borge was escorted by Panamanian police to a plane at Tucumán Airport in Panama City. The former governor of Quintana Roo State for Mexico's ruling pre-party is accused of selling government real estate at 1% of its value, as well as money laundering and other offenses. And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. In a setback for United States President Donald Trump, a tell-all book on him has been released before the due date. The explosive new book, Fire and Fury, which claims to expose chaos behind the scenes at the White House, was released in the middle of the night by its United States publisher. This is in response to Donald Trump's lawyers who threatened to stop publication. The book was due to come out next Tuesday. And our correspondent in Washington, Jorge Gestoso, filed this report.
The book Fire and Fury Inside Trump White House by the author Michael Wolff is already in the bookstores this morning since 9 a.m. According to what the author and the publisher says, 4 days ahead, given the fact that last night President Trump was trying to stop the publishing of that book. Also, the previous day, he was threatening to take legal action to the chief of strategy, the former chief of strategy, we're talking Stephen Bannon, because he's quoted in the book with some compromising things about what's going on inside the White House. Regarding the staff of the White House, according to the author of the book, most of them are referring to the President of the United States as dumb, as idiot. According to Stephen Bannon, for example, the meeting that they have, we're talking about Donald Trump Jr. and the son-in-law of Mr. Trump, Jared Kushner, on 2016 with a Russian lawyer, is being considered unpatriotic and treacherous. Another thing is that Ivanka Trump, according to what is reflected in the book, is having ambitious to be the first woman president of the United States, and according to the author, is being perceived as dumb as a brick. Very interesting also an article that has been published this morning in the New York Times, in which, according to the article, President Trump was trying to impede that the Attorney General, we're talking about Jeff Sessions, do not recuse himself. So that means that he was trying to push him, quote unquote, to defend himself regarding that investigation about the possible interference of Russia in the electoral campaign. Also, according to that article, a lawyer has been sent to the Congress trying to find some dirt on James Comey, the former FBI director, because they were trying to fire Comey, that he was precisely digging about possible interference of the Russians, and also had to do with the emails of Hillary Clinton, the rival of Mr. Trump. Very compromising the situation for Mr. Trump. He's actively trying to act like a bully, trying to disqualify everybody. He says that the book is a bunch of lies, that all the quotes are absolutely false, they are lies, and they're trying to undermine his presidency. But most definitely, the release of the book today and the article of the New York Times regarding the possible interference of Mr. Trump as an obstruction of justice are the key elements, the key issues that are being discussed today here in Washington. We get back to you.
Thanks, Mr. Gestoso, for that report. Snowstorms in the United States have left more than 16 people dead. Authorities warn that the wave of cold weather will continue. We have details in the next report.
Experts have predicted that more than 20 centimeters of snow will fall in New York City during the snowstorm. Due to the intensity of the phenomenon, meteorologists are calling it a bomb cyclone.
Very cold. I can't feel my nose. Walking up to my job, and I'll just hang out. I don't have to drive. I don't have to worry about anything. Just walk carefully.
According to official numbers, at least 16 people have died throughout the country for causes related to the snowstorm. This doctor explains that in many cases, the incidents occur because some people underestimate the storm's power.
At this time of the year, people grabbing their shovel, going out and shoveling their drive, and then getting a heart attack. Along those same lines, people using their snowblower, it gets clogged up with a chunk of ice, and they'll use their hand to remove that chunk of ice and unfortunately end up removing some fingers. And then lastly, it's also the time of the year people are getting up on ladders to put up and take down Christmas decorations. Those ladders on icy ground can often result in a traumatic injury.
Dozens of schools have closed. Some 4,000 flights have been cancelled. A woman died on her way to work when her car slid into a railroad crossing and collided with a passing train in Pennsylvania. In the most affected cities like Boston and New York, authorities are taking precautions to protect the population.
What's quite clear is this is a serious storm between the very low temperature, the strong winds, the driving snow. Everyone should take this one very seriously and take precautions. We Because of the fact that the storm has intensified in the last few hours, I am now declaring a winter weather emergency for New York City. That will give our city agencies the ability to take additional actions to keep us safe.
The worst of the bomb cyclone hasn't come yet. Experts say that this weekend will be the end of the storm. However, temperatures will drop even more, below 20 degrees Celsius.
Saudi Arabia has changed the legal status of its national oil company, Saudi Aramco, to allow future investors to buy shares in the company. The kingdom has said it wants to sell 5% of Saudi Aramco, which it aims to float on the stock market later this year. The sale is the centerpiece of ambitious plans to reform the country's economy, led by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Prince Mohammed believes the listing could value the company at $2 trillion. This is expected to be the world's largest ever initial public offering. Now, let's have a look at some of the other news from around the world.
More than a dozen people have been killed and hundreds were feared injured after a train struck a lorry, derailed and burst into flames in South Africa as it travelled between Port Elizabeth and Johannesburg. 4 of the injured are quite critical.
For now, because we are still doing investigation, 12 fatalities have been confirmed. 12 people have died. But we don't know, after we'll have completed our investigation, as to how many fatalities will we have discovered. And there are almost 268 people that have been injured, and 4 of them are quite critical.
More than 100 protesters have marched through the streets of Paris to demand the release of Palestinian activist Ahed Tamimi and her family. Ahed was charged in an Israeli court for assaulting security forces, incitement and throwing stones after she hit a soldier outside her home in the West Bank. Ahed's mother, Nariman Tamimi, also has been charged with incitement and assault.
In the 21st century, this is the only instance of colonization. Macron himself said that colonization was a crime against humanity, so he should maybe act upon his words and stop rolling out the red carpet for a big war criminal.
At least 10 teachers have been arrested and 2 injured in Karachi, where a large number of teachers have been protesting since 11 days against the non-payment of salaries. Police fired tear gas and baton charged teachers when they attempted to march towards a Pakistani politician's house.
We've come to the end of this daily news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telus2tv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telus English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.